Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is Isis Unveiled. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Unconventional Bible Study, 161 videos, I know it's a long slog, on how I came to leave Christianity because of the things that are contained in the Bible. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Isis Unveiled with Part 2, Chapter 6, Part 1. The curtains of yesterday drop down. The curtains of tomorrow roll up, but yesterday and tomorrow both are. Sartor Resartus, natural supernaturalism. And I say that that is not true. There is nothing but today. How about that? Right? You cannot change yesterday. You will not be able to change tomorrow, but you can change today. Today is the only day that you actually can change, and so today is the only real day. May we not, then, be permitted to examine the authenticity of the Bible, which, since the 2nd century, has been put forth as the criterion of scientific truth. To maintain itself in a position so exalted, it must challenge human criticism, conflict between religion and science. And again, I can point you to the Unconventional Bible Study where I have indeed questioned the authenticity of the Bible. One kiss of Nara upon the lips of Nari, and all nature wakes. Venus Nati, a Hindu poet. We must not forget that the Christian Church owes its present canonical Gospels, and hence its whole religious dogmatism, to the Sortes Sanctum. I was doing a reaction video. Unable to agree as to which were the most divinely inspired of the numerous Gospels extant in its time, the mysterious Council of Nicaea concluded to leave the decision of the puzzling question to miraculous intervention. This Nicene Council may well be called mysterious. There was a mystery, first, in it the mystical number of its 318 bishops. And we are going to pause. We will be right back with that one. Y'all remember what the number of manifestation is? If you've been around any point of time whatsoever, you should, because we mention it quite often. Maybe not often enough, but definitely quite often. The number of manifestation is 138. Here we have a variation of it. We have 318. Same thing. Same concept, same principle. 1, 3, and 8 must be included in manifestation. It is the as above, so below. It is everything all at once, right? It is the one, which is the divine. God is. God is me. God is you. He is the space between me and you, and the space between me and you. The very first law of creation, all things are one. 1 is the number of God. 3 is the number of the Trinity. That is, the body. The soul, which is the individualized piece of God, which pilots this body, makes the decisions for where you are going in this 5D space. And 8, which is the 7 internal chakras and the 1 external chakra, which if you have in alignment with the 3 top and the 3 bottom, going into the 1 in the middle, into the 1 on the outside, leads to the 8, which is how manifestation works. As above, so below. We talk about this quite often. It is a very integral part of the Infinite Integrations playlist, and it is quite interesting to see that the Council of Nicaea had 318 bishops. That was, I am positive, not a coincidence. All right, back to the text. Where did I put my glasses? There was a mystery, first, in the mystical number of its 318 bishops, on which Barnabas lays such a stress. I don't know about Barnabas, but I do know about 138. Added to this, there is no agreement among ancient writers as to the time and place of its assembly, nor even as to the bishop who presided. Notwithstanding the grandiloquent eulogium of Constantine, Sabinus, the bishop of Heraclea, affirms that, except Constantine, the emperor, and Eusebius Pamphilus, these bishops were a set of illiterate, simple creatures that understood nothing. I wonder why they were there if they understood nothing. I wonder if it was just to make the numbers right, which is the equivalent to saying that they were a set of fools. Such was apparently the opinion entertained of them by Pappus, who tells us of the bit of magic resorted to decide which were the true Gospels. In his Syndicon to that council, Pappus says, having promiscuously put all the books that were referred to the council for determination under a communion table in a church, they, the bishops, besought the Lord that the inspired writings might get upon the table, while the spurious ones remained underneath. And it happened accordingly. But we are not told who kept the keys of the council chamber overnight. On the authority of the ecclesiastical eyewitnesses, therefore, we are at liberty to say that the Christian world owes its word of God to a method of divination, for resorting to which the Church subsequently condemned unfortunate victims as conjurers, enchanters, magicians, witches, and Vaticanators, and burnt them by thousands. I didn't know of a Vaticanator. That's funny. In treating of this truly divine phenomena of these self-sorting manuscripts, the fathers of the Church say that God himself presides over this sortes. As we have shown elsewhere, Augustine confesses that he himself used this sort of divination. But opinions, like revealed religions, are liable to change. That which for nearly 1,500 years was imposed on Christendom as a book, of which every word was written under the direct supervision of the Holy Ghost, of which not a syllable nor a comma could be changed without sacrilege, is now being retranslated, revised, corrected, and clipped of whole verses, in some cases of entire chapters. And yet, as soon as the new edition is out, its doctors will have us accepted it as a new revelation of the 19th century, without the alternative of being held as an infidel. Thus, we see that no more within than without its precincts is the infallible Church to be trusted more than would be reasonably convenient. The forefathers of our modern divines found authority for the sortes in the verse where it is said, "The lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord." And now their direct heirs hold that the whole disposing thereof is of the devil. Perhaps they are unconsciously beginning to endorse the doctrine of the Syrian Bardaneses, that the actions of God, as well as of man, are subject to necessity. It was no doubt, also, according to strict necessity, that the Neoplatonists were so summarily dealt with by the Christian mob. In those days, the doctrines of the Hindu naturalist and antediluvian Pyrrhonist were forgotten, if they had ever been known at all, to any but a few philosophers, and Mr. Darwin, with his modern discoveries, had not even been mentioned in the prophecies. In this case, the law of the survival of the fittest was reversed. The Neoplatonists were doomed to destruction from the day when they openly sided with Aristotle. At the beginning of the 4th century, crowds began gathering at the doors of the academy, where they learned the unfortunate Hypatia expounded the doctrines of the divine Plato and Plotinus, and thereby impeded the progress of Christian proselytism. She too successfully dispelled the mist hanging over the religious mysteries invented by the fathers, not to be considered dangerous. This alone would have been sufficient to imperil both herself and her followers. It was precisely the teachings of this pagan philosopher, which had been so freely borrowed by the Christians to give a finishing touch to their otherwise incomprehensible scheme, that had seduced so many into joining the new religion. And now the Platonic light began shining so inconveniently broad upon the pious patchwork, as to allow everyone to see whence the revealed doctrines were derived. But there was still a greater peril. Hypatia had studied under Plutarch, the head of the Athenian school, and had learned all the secrets of theurgy. While she lived to instruct the multitude, no divine miracles could be produced before one who could divulge the natural causes by which they took place. Her doom was sealed by Cyril, whose eloquence she eclipsed, and whose authority, built on degrading superstitions, had to yield before hers, which was erected on the rock of immutable natural law. It is more than curious that Cave, the author of Lives of the Father, should find it incredible that Cyril sanctioned her murder on account of his general character. A saint who will sell the gold and silver vessels of his church, and then, after spending the money, lie at his trial, as he did, may well be suspected of anything. Besides, in this case, the church had to fight for her life, to say nothing of her future supremacy. Alone, the hated and erudite pagan scholars, and the no less learned Gnostics, held their doctrines the hitherto concealed wires of all these theological marionettes. Once the curtain should be lifted, the connection between the old pagan and the new Christian religions would be exposed, and then what would have become of the mysteries into which it is a sin and blasphemy to pry? With such a coincidence of the astronomical allegories of various pagan myths with the dates adopted by Christianity for the nativity, crucifixion, and resurrection, and such an identity of rites and ceremonies, what would have been the fate of the new religion, had not the Church, under the pretext of serving Christ, got rid of the too well-informed philosophers? To guess what, if the coup d'etat had then failed, might have been the prevailing religion in our own century, would indeed be a hard task. But in all probability, the state of things which made of the Middle Ages a period of intellectual darkness, which degraded the nations of the Occident, and lowered the European of those days almost to the level of a Papuan savage, would not have occurred. The fears of the Christians were but too well-founded, and their pious zeal and prophetic insight was rewarded from the very first. In the demolition of the Serapeum, after the bloody riot between the Christian mob and the pagan worshippers had ended, with the interference of the emperor, a Latin cross of a perfect Christian shape was discovered hewn upon the granite slabs of the adytum. This was a lucky discovery indeed, and the monks did not fail to claim that the cross had been hallowed by the pagans in a spirit of prophecy. At least Sozomen, with an air of triumph, records the fact. But archaeology and symbolism, those tireless and implacable enemies of clerical false pretenses, have found in the hieroglyphics of the legend running around the design at least a partial interpretation of its meaning. According to King and other numismatists and archaeologists, the cross was placed there as a symbol of eternal life. Such a Tao or Egyptian cross was used in the Bacchic and Eleusinian mysteries. Symbol of the dual generative power, it was laid upon the breast of the initiate after his new birth was accomplished, and the Mysti had returned from their baptism in the sea. It was a mystic sign that his spiritual birth had regenerated and united his astral soul with his divine spirit, and that he was ready to ascend in spirit to the blessed abodes of light and glory, the Eleusinia. The Tao was a magic talisman at the same time as a religious emblem. It was adopted by the Christians through the Gnostics and Kabbalists, who used it largely, as their numerous gems testify, and who had the Tao, or handled cross, from the Egyptians, and the Latin cross from the Buddhist missionaries, who brought it from India, where it can be found until now, 2 or 3 centuries BC. The Assyrians, Egyptians, ancient Americans, Hindus, and Romans had it in various but very slight modifications of shape. Till very late in the medieval ages, it was considered a potent spell against epilepsy and demoniacal possession, and the signet of the living God, brought down in St. John's vision by the angel ascending from the east to seal the servants of our God in their foreheads, was but the same mystic Tau, the Egyptian cross. In the painted glass of St. Dionysius, France, this angel is represented as stamping this sign on the forehead of the elect. The legend reads, Signum Dei. In King's Gnostics, the author reminds us that this mark is commonly borne by St. Anthony, an Egyptian recluse. What the real meaning of the Tau was is explained to us by Christian St. John, the Egyptian Hermes, and the Hindu Brahmins. It is but too evident that with the apostle, at least, it meant the ineffable name, as he calls this signet of the living God, a few chapters on, the Father's name written on their foreheads. The Brahmatma, the chief of the Hindu initiates, had on his headgear 2 keys, symbol of the revealed mystery of life and death, placed cross-like. And in some Buddhist pagodas of Tartary and Mongolia, the entrance of a chamber within the temple, generally containing the staircase which leads to the inner Daghoba, and the porticos of some prachita, are ornamented with a cross formed of 2 fishes, and as found on some zodiacs of the Buddhists. We should not wonder at all at the learning that the sacred device in the tombs of the catacombs at Rome, the Vesica Pisces, was derived from this said Buddhist zodiacal sign. That is an extrapolation that is not necessarily true. The Vesica Pisces is an important part of sacred geometry, and you can arrive at it without having the history attached to it from India. That's not to say that it did not come from there, but it is an assumption to say that it did. The Vesica Pisces being part of geometry, you can make the argument that Plato and all of them knew the Eastern religions. You can make that argument. But to assume that the shape of the fish is influenced the Vesica Pisces is the opposite of what probably happened. The Vesica Pisces probably influenced the fish. Maybe not in Europe. I'm not a Eurocentrist in that manner. But the geometry to me is more likely the source than any illustration anywheres. I could be wrong. That is not something that I am going to be firm upon, but it is something that I did want to point out because it is entirely possible that they got the Vesica Pisces simply from geometry, especially considering how they revere geometry. And again, that is not to say they did not get the geometry from India, but how general must have been that geometrical figure in the world's symbols may be inferred from the fact that there is a Masonic tradition that Solomon's temple was built on 3 foundations, forming the triple Tau, or 3 crosses. And again, that is almost certainly a self-insertion. There is, as far as I am aware, there is no record that would even intimate that. It is definitely not biblical. In its mystical sense, the Egyptian cross owes its origin, as an emblem, to the realization by the earliest philosophy of an androgynous dualism of every manifestation in nature, which proceeds from the abstract ideal of a likewise androgynous deity, while the Christian emblem is simply due to chance. And again, that is some self-insertion, right? The cross being the representation of vertical and horizontal, of the 4 directions, of the cardinal points of the map, of whatever the designation may be, does not necessarily mean that you are saying that there is an androgynous deity. It just doesn't. As far as I'm aware, there are a few, at least, religions scattered across the world did not do that. That's not to say that some did not believe in an androgynous God, right? I believe that God is neither male nor female, but contains both male and female. I do not view God as a human. That sets me apart from many different people, right? I don't necessarily have to have my God to resemble me in order for me to understand that there is a God and that he is in control. Some people need that reassurance that they are the chosen one. I really don't. This androgynous deity while it is absolutely a thing in some places, does not mean that it is absolutely a thing in all places. Self-insertion. Had the Mosaic law prevailed, Jesus would have been lapidated. The crucifix was an instrument of torture, and utterly common among the Romans, as it was unknown among Semitic nations. It was called the Tree of Infamy. It is but later that it was adopted as a Christian symbol. But during the first 2 decades, the apostles looked upon it with horror. It is certainly not the Christian cross that John had in mind when speaking of the signet of the living God, but the mystic Tao, the Tetragrammaton, or mighty name, which, on the most ancient Kabbalistic talismans, was represented by the 4 Hebrew letters composing the holy word. Right? The Romans used crucifixion quite extensively. And one of the main problems that I have with Catholicism is the fact that they worship this, right? You will not see just the cross in Catholicism. There is always a suffering figure attached to the cross. That is, to me, one of the worst ways to represent what happened there. The best way to represent it is an empty cross, right? He has overcome the death and destruction that was wailed upon him by the Romans. But to take that and make that the symbol, right? Not just the cross, but the cross with the figure attached in suffering and pain, being the primary identifier for your religious symbology, lets you know the intentions of the organization behind it, right? They aren't talking about the overcoming of death. They could have had an empty tomb. They could have had an empty cross. No, they are worried about the death. They are worried about the blood. And the blood is the part that I take the exception to, right? You don't have to be washed in blood to be saved from sin. That is a major key sticking point between me and these religions. You don't have to agree with that, but the Bible bears me out, not you. And so, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, fall back to the Bible study. I understand that it is long. I understand most people are not going to slog through it. But I say these things because I did that Bible study. If you are walking around with the cross with the person nailed to it, then you are worshiping the horror. You don't have to believe that. It is simply a truth. The famous Lady Ellenborough, known among the Arabs of Damascus and in the desert after her last marriage as Hanuem Medjouet, had a talisman in her possession presented to her by a Druze from Mount Lebanon. It was recognized by a certain sign on its left corner to belong to that class of gems which is known in Palestine as a messianic amulet of the 2nd or 3rd century BC. It is a green stone of a pentagonal form, and at the bottom is engraved a fish, higher, Solomon's seal, and still higher, the 4 Chaldaic letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, Iaho, which form the name of the deity, Yahweh. These are arranged in quite an unusual way, running from below upward, the reversed order, and forming the Egyptian Tao. Around these there is a legend, which, as the gem is not our property, we are not at liberty to give. Horseshit. The Tao, in a mystical sense, is, as well as the Crux Ansata, is the tree of life. That right there, that's some bullshit, right? If you are enabled to say all of the things that you have said in this study, if you have brought out all of these examples, not being in possession of the gem is no reason to not tell the story of the gem. It's simply not. That is concealing information, which is antithetical to everything I do. So, it is well known that the earliest Christian emblems, before it was ever attempted to represent the bodily appearance of Jesus, were the lamb, the good shepherd, and the fish. The origin of the latter emblem, which has so puzzled the archaeologists, thus becomes comprehensible. The whole secret lies in the easily ascertained fact that while in the Kabbalah the King Messiah is called interpreter, or revealer of the mystery, and shown to be the 5th admonition in the Talmud, for reasons we will now explain, the Messiah is very often designated as Dag, or the fish. This is an inheritance from the Chaldees and relates, as the very name indicates, to the Babylonian Dagon, the man-fish, who was the instructor and interpreter of the people to whom he appeared. Abarbanel explains the name by stating that the sign of his Messiah's coming is the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in the sign Pisces. Now that might be important for the 12,000-year disaster cycle, I don't know. Therefore, as the Christians were intent upon identifying their Christos with the Messiah of the Old Testament, which is not there, they adopted it so readily as to forget its true origin might be traced still farther back than the Babylonian Dagon. How eagerly and closely the ideal of Jesus was united by the early Christians with every imaginable Kabbalistic and pagan tenet may be inferred from the language of Clemens of Alexandria, addressed to his brother co-religionists. This is the symbol here. When they were debating upon the choice of the most appropriate symbol to remind them of Yeshua, Clemens advised them in the following words: "Let the engraving upon the gem of your ring be either a dove, or a ship running before the wind, the Arga, or a fish." Was the good father then writing this sentence, laboring under the recollection of Yeshua, son of Nun, called Yeshua, in the Greek and South Slavonian versions, called Jesus? Or had he forgotten the real interpretation of these pagan symbols? You may be confused by the fact that I call Jesus Yeshua, but that is the actual literal spelling of his name. It is exactly the same as this. Joshua and Jesus are the same word. It is Yeshua for both of them. Yeshua, son of Nun, or Navis, could have with perfect propriety adopted the image of a ship, or even of a fish, for Yeshua means Jesus, son of the fish god. But it was really too hazardous to connect the emblems of Venus, Astarte, and all the Hindu goddesses, the Arga, dove, and fish, with the immaculate birth of their god. This looks very much as if in the early days of Christianity, but little difference was made between Christ, Bacchus, Apollo, and the Hindu Krishna, the incarnation of Vishnu, with whose first avatar this symbol of the fish originated. In the Hare Purana and the Bhagavad Gita, as well as in several other books, the god Vishnu is shown as having assumed the form of a fish with a human head in order to reclaim the Vedas lost during the deluge. Having enabled Vishvamitara to escape with all his tribe in the ark, Vishnu, pitying weak and ignorant humanity, remained with them for some time. It was this god who taught them to build houses, cultivate the land, and to thank the unknown deity whom he represented by building temples and instituting a regular worship. And, as he remained half fish, half man all the time, at every sunset he used to return to the ocean wherein he passed the night. It is he, says the sacred book, who taught men after the diluvium all that was necessary for their happiness. One day he plunged into the water and returned no more, for the earth had covered itself again with vegetation, fruit, and cattle. But he had taught the Brahmins the secret of all things. Hare Purana. So far, we see in this narrative the double of the story given by the Babylonian Berosus about Oans, the fishman, who is no other than Vishnu, unless, indeed, we have to believe that it was Chaldea which civilized India. We say, again, we desire to give nothing on our sole authority. Therefore, we cite Jacoliot, who, however criticized and contradicted on other points, and however loose he may be in the matter of chronology, though even in this he is nearer right than those scientists who would have all Hindu books written since the Council of Nicaea, at least cannot be denied the reputation of a good Sanskrit scholar. And he says, while analyzing the word Oan, or Oannes, that O in Sanskrit is an interjection expressed in an invocation, as O Swayambhuva, O God, etc., and An is a radical, signifying in Sanskrit a spirit, a being, and we presume what the Greeks meant by the word demon, a semigod. "What an extraordinary antiquity," he remarks. "This fable of Vishnu, disguised as a fish, gives to the sacred books of the Hindus, especially in the presence of the fact that the Vedas and Manu reckon more than 25,000 years of existence, as proved by the most serious as the most authentic documents. Few peoples, says the learned Helena, have their annals more authentic or serious than the Hindus." We may, perhaps, throw additional light upon the puzzling question of the fish symbol by reminding the reader that according to Genesis, the first created of living beings, the first type of animal life, was the fish. "And the Elohim said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that hath life. And God created whales, and in the morning and evening were the fifth day. Jonah is swallowed by a big fish, and is cast out again 3 days later. This the Christians regard as a premonition of the 3-day sepulchre of Jesus, which preceded his resurrection, though the statement of the 3 days is as fanciful as much of the rest, and adopted to fit the well-known threat to destroy the temple and rebuild it again in 3 days. Between his burial and alleged resurrection, there intervened but 1 day, the Jewish Sabbath, as he was buried on Friday evening and rose to life at dawn on Sunday. However, whatever other circumstance may be regarded as a prophecy, the story of Jonah cannot be made to answer the purpose. It is important to note that Jesus was not in the tomb for 3 days according to the Bible. He was interred on Friday evening, which was the Passover, the day after the Passover. And they weren't allowed to leave him up overnight, so they begged to have him pulled down after he was dead. And so they pulled him down and they put him in there. And he was in there Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday morning he was gone. It was not 3 days. That is an important thing that nobody pays attention to, much like the entirety of the Christmas story. Big fish is Cetus, the Latinized form of Keto, and Keto is Dagon, Poseidon, the female gender of it being Keton Atargatis, the Syrian goddess, and Venus of Ascalon. The figure, or bust, of Der Keto, or Astarte, was generally represented on the prow of the ships. Iona, the Greek Iona, or dove, sacred to Venus, fled to Jaffa, where the god Dagon, the man-fish, was worshipped, and dared not go to Nineveh, where the dove was revered. Hence, some commentators believe that when Jonah was thrown overboard and was swallowed by a fish, we must understand that he was picked up by one of these vessels, on the prow of which was the figure of Keto. You can take it that way. I do not put a whole lot of faith in the story of Jonah, so I don't even really care. But that is not what the book says. Just so it's abundantly clear, the book says a fish. It does not say a ship with a fish on the prow. But the Kabbalists have another legend to this effect. They say that Jonah was a runaway priest from the temple of the goddess where the dove was worshipped, and desired to abolish idolatry and institute monotheistic worship. That, caught near Jaffa, he was held prisoner by the devotees of Dagon in one of the prison cells of the temple, and that it was the strange form of the cell which gave rise to the allegory. In the collection of Mos de Garcia, a Portuguese Kabbalist, there is a drawing representing the interior of the temple of Dagon. In the middle stands an immense idol, the upper portion of whose body is human, the lower fish-like. Between the belly and the tail is an aperture which can be closed like the door of a closet. In it, the transgressors against the local deity were shut up until further disposal. The drawing in question was made from an old tablet covered with curious drawings and inscriptions in old Phoenician characters describing this Venetian obelette of biblical days. The tablet itself was found in an excavation a few miles from Jaffa. Y'all may also be confused why I say Jaffa and not Jaffa. That is because when these places were named, much like with Yeshua, there was no J. It was Ya. The J was really a Y. That is why I pronounce it Jaffa and why I pronounce it Yeshua and Jesus. Considering the extraordinary tendency of Oriental nations for puns and allegories, it is not barely possible that the big fish by which Yonah was swallowed was simply the cell with the belly of the Dagon. Have you ever wondered why so many names begin with J when they didn't have a J? Isn't that an interesting concept to kick around in your mind? It is significant that this double appellation of Messiah and dog, fish, of the Talmudist would so well apply to the Hindu Vishnu, the preserving spirit, and the second personage of the Brahmic Trinity. This deity, having already manifested itself, is still regarded as the future savior of humanity, and is the selected Redeemer, who will appear at its 10th incarnation, or avatar, like the Messiah of the Jews, to lead the blessed onward and restore to them the primitive Vedas. At its first avatar, Vishnu is alleged to have appeared to humanity in form like a fish. In the temple of Ramah, there is a representation of this god which answers perfectly to that of Dagon, as given by Berosus. He has the body of a man, issuing from the mouth of a fish, and holds in his hands the lost Veda. Vishnu, moreover, is the water god, in one sense, the logos of the Parabrahm. For, as the three persons of the manifested Godhead constantly interchange their attributes, we see him in the same temple represented as reclining on the seven-headed serpent, Anatta, eternity, and moving, like the Spirit of God, on the face of the primeval waters. Vishnu is evidently the Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalists, for Adam is the Logos, or the first anointed, and as Adam second is the King Messiah. Lakshmi, or Lakshmi, the passive or feminine counterpart of Vishnu, the creator and preserver, is also called Adam Maya. She is the mother of the world, the Matri, the Venus Aphrodite of the Greeks, also Isis and Eve. While Venus is born from the sea foam, Lakshmi springs out from the water at the churning of the sea. When born, she is so beautiful that all the gods fall in love with her. The Yus, borrowing their types, wherever they could get them, made their first woman after the pattern of Lakshmi. This is curious that Viracocha, the supreme being in Peru, means, literally, translated, foam of the sea. Eugene Burnouf, the great authority of the French school, announces his opinion in the same spirit. "We must learn one day," he observes, "that all ancient traditions disfigured by immigration and legend belong to the history of India." Such is the opinion of Colebrook, Inman, King, Jacoliot, and many other Orientalists. We have said above that, according to the secret computation peculiar to the students of the hidden science, Messiah is the fifth emanation, or potency. In the Jewish Kabbalah, where the 10 Sephiroth emanate from Adam Kaman, placed below the crown, he comes fifth. So in the Gnostic system, so in the Buddhistic, in which the fifth Buddha, Maitri, will appear as at his last advent to save mankind before the final destruction of the world. If Vishnu is represented in his forthcoming and last appearance as the 10th avatar, or incarnation, it is only because every unit held as an androgyne manifests itself doubly. The Buddhists who reject this dual-sex incarnation reckon but 5. Thus, while Vishnu is to make his last appearance in his 10th, Buddha is said to do the same in his 5th incarnation. The better to illustrate the idea and show how completely the real meaning of the avatars, known only to the students of the secret doctrine, was misunderstood by the ignorant masses, We, elsewhere, give the diagrams of the Hindu and Chaldeo-Kabbalistic avatars and emanations. This basic and true fundamental stone of the secret cycles shows on its very face that, far from taking their revealed Vedas and Bible literally, the Brahmin Pundits and the Tanaim, the scientists and philosophers of pre-Christian epochs, speculated on the creation and development of the world quite in a Darwinian way, both anticipating him and his school in the natural selection of species, gradual development, and transformation. We advise everyone tempted to enter an indignant protest against this affirmation to read more carefully the books of Manu, even the incomplete translations of Sir William Jones, and the more or less careless ones of Jacoliot. If we compare the Senko-Niathon Phoenician cosmogony and the record of Berosus with the Bhagavata and Manu, we will find enunciated exactly the same principles as those now offered as the latest developments of modern science. We have quoted from the Chaldean and Phoenician records in our first volume. We will now glance at the Hindu books. When this world had issued out of darkness, the subtile, elementary principles produced the vegetal seed, which animated first the plants. From the plants, life passed into fantastical bodies, which were born in the illis of the waters, and then, through a series of forms and various animals, it reached man. He, man, before becoming such, will pass successively through plants, worms, insects, fish, serpents, tortoises, cattle, and wild animals. Such is the inferior degree. Such, from Brahma down to vegetables, are declared the transmigrations which take place in the world. In the Sancho-Niathonian cosmogony, men are also evolved out of the illis of the chaos, and the same evolution and transformation of species are shown. And now we will leave the rostrum to Mr. Darwin. I believe that animals have descended from, at most, only 4 or 5 progenitors. Again, I should infer from analogy that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from some one primordial form. I view all beings not as special creations, but as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Silurian system was deposited. In short, they lived in the Senko-Niathonian chaos and in the illis of Manu. Vyasa and Kapila go still farther than Darwin and Manu. They see in Brahma but the name of the universal germ. They deny the existence of a first cause and pretend that everything in nature found itself developed only in consequence of material and fatal forces, says Jacoliot. Correct as may be this latter quotation from Kapila, it demands very few words of explanation. Jacoliot repeatedly compares Kapila and Vedavyasa with Philo and Littre. We have nothing against such a comparison with the Greek philosopher, but we must decidedly object to any with the French comatist. We find it unmerited fling at the memory of the great Aryan sage. Nowhere does this prolific writer state the repudiation by either ancient or modern Brahmas of God, the unknown universal spirit, nor does any other Orientalist accuse the Hindus of the same, however perverted the general deductions of our savants about Buddhistic atheism. On the contrary, Jacoliot states more than once that the learned pundits and educated Brahmins have never shared the popular superstitions, and affirms their unshaken belief in the unity of God and the soul's immortality. Although most assuredly neither Kapila nor the initiated Brahmins nor the followers of the Vedanta school would ever admit the existence of an anthropomorphic creator, a first cause in the Christian sense. Jacoliot, in his Indo-European and African traditions, is the first to make an onslaught on Professor Muller for remarking that the Hindu gods were masks without actors, names without being, and not beings without names. Quoting in support of his argument numerous verses from the sacred Hindu books, he adds, "Is it possible to refuse to the author of these stanzas a definite and clear conception of the divine force of the unique being, master and sovereign of the universe, were the altars then built to a metaphor?" The latter argument is perfectly just, so far as Max Muller's negation is concerned. But we doubt whether the French rationalists understand Kapila and Vyasa's philosophy better than the German philologist does the theological twaddle, as the latter terms the authoritative Veda. Professor Muller and Jacoliot have ever so great claims to erudition, and be ever so familiar with Sanskrit and other ancient Oriental languages, but both lack the key to the 1,001 mysteries of the old secret doctrine and its philosophy. Only, while the German philologist does not even take the trouble to look into this magical and theological twaddle, we find the French Indianus never losing an opportunity to investigate. Moreover, he honestly admits his incompetency to ever fathom this ocean of mystical learning. In its existence, he not only firmly believes, but throughout his works he incessantly calls the attention of science to its unmistakable traces at every step in India. Still, though the learned pundits and Brahmins, his revered masters of the pagodas of Villanor and Chalambrum in the Carnatic, as it seems, positively refuse to reveal to him the mysteries of the magical parts of the Agorachara Parikashai and of Brahmata's triangle, he persists in the honest declaration that everything is possible in Hindu metaphysics, even to the Kapila and Vyasa systems having been hitherto misunderstood. Monsieur Jacoliot weakens his assertion immediately afterwards with the following contradiction. "We were one day inquiring of a Brahmin of the pagoda of Chalambrum, who belonged to the skeptical school of the naturalist of Vyasa, whether he believed in the existence of God. He answered us, smiling, 'Aham eva param Brahma. I am myself a God.' 'What do you mean by that?' 'I mean that every being on earth, however humble, is an immortal portion of the immortal matter. That is what I believe. You are not a god, but you are a piece of God.' The answer is one which would suggest itself to every ancient philosopher, Kabbalist, and Gnostic of the early days. It contains the very spirit of the Delphic and Kabbalistic commandment, for esoteric philosophy solved, ages ago, the problem of what man was, is, and will be. If persons, believing the Bible verses which teach that the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, reject at the same time the idea that every atom of this dust, as every particle of this living soul, contains God within itself, then we pity the logic of that Christian. He forgets the verses which precede the one in question. God blesses equally every beast of the field and every living creature, in the water as in the air. He endows them all with life, which is a breath of his own spirit and the soul of the animal. Humanity is the Adam Kadmon of the unknown, his microcosm and his only representative on earth, and every man is a god on earth. I hold slight differentiation with that. You are a representative of God on earth. You are not, in fact, a god. That is an important distinction to me. It doesn't have to be to you, but it absolutely 1,000%, and yes, I know that is an impossible mathematic number, 1,000%, I believe that. We would ask this French scholar, who seems so familiar with every sloka of the books of Manu and other Vedic writers, the meaning of this sentence so well known to him. Plants and vegetation reveal a multitude of forms because of their precedent actions. They are surrounded by darkness, but are nevertheless endowed with an interior soul and feel, equally, pleasure and pain. If the Hindu philosophy teaches the presence of a degree of soul in the lowest forms of vegetable life and even in every atom in space, how is it possible that they should deny the same immortal principle to man? And if once admit the immortal spirit in man, How can it logically deny the existence of the parent source? I will not say the first, but the eternal cause? Neither rationalists nor sensualists, who do not comprehend Indian metaphysics, should estimate the ignorance of Hindu metaphysicians on their own. We're going to pause here and talk about the theory of spiritual evolution for just a second. If you are unaware, I hold some unconventional beliefs. One of those unconventional beliefs is the theory of spiritual evolution. It is, in part, what we just read, and that is why I'm bringing it up. I believe that there are 8 total realms of existence. The first is the divine, but separated from the divine is the first, which is the individual atom. Every single individual atom is out there trying to be the best atom possible. The carbon is clumped into coal and diamonds, and the various forms of all of the atoms are scattered throughout existence. They are merely existing. They don't get free will. They don't get to choose where to go, where to move, what to do. They exist as a single point in space. That is the first dimension. The next dimension is the realm of plants. Now, plants partake of the first dimension. They take the individualized pieces of carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and all of the things, and they incorporate them into themselves. And they become more, and they grow and they stretch, but only in one real direction. They do get a little bit wider, but they can't make the decision to move. But they get tall, and they move from side to side a little bit, but that's really not 3D space. That is the second dimension. They can grow up, but they can't move themselves over there. I don't like this spot, I want to be over there. The third realm of existence is the simple animals. These are the animals without the capacity to think at all. They are merely running on instinct. Now, dogs, which they're not over here today, but dogs are part of the next step. They can think and plan, but this step is the simple animals that don't really prepare for the winter. They don't foresee problems in the future, right? They just exist. That is most animals, and that is the third realm of existence. They grow up, they grow out, but they can move over there. They can say, well, this is a little bit hot. I'm going to stand under that tree. I'm a little bit thirsty. I'm going to walk to this water. That is the third plane of existence. They don't plan, but they exist, and they move. The fourth is the intelligent animals. These are the ones that can be trained. These are the ones that can anticipate. These are the ones that do, for a small part, plan. Some of that is instinctual, granted. But my dogs have the ability to anticipate, right? They can know that if I put on this particular pair of shorts or jogging pants these days, they know that we're about to go outside, right? They know that. They know that when we get back, there's going to be food available. They know that. They can anticipate that. And if I am late in my schedule, they understand that. Daylight savings time threw a big kink into things because of that. My dogs are used to a pattern. And for 6 months, we went at 6 o'clock in the morning. Every single morning, we go and do the first part of the walk, and then I go and do the second part of my walk. Every single morning for 6 months straight, we walked out of that door between 6 and 6:05. That is me. I am pretty punctual. And then daylight savings time hit, and it was an hour later. And at 7 or at 5, they were ready to go on their 6 o'clock walk. Right? They were ready to go when it wasn't time. They were anticipating. They were able to think, and that ability to think gives you the ability to master the fourth plane of existence: length, width, breadth, and thought, right? And the next is the mastery of time. This is us. This is where we live. It is the fifth dimension. We live here because we can think, we can move, right? We have length, width, depth. We can think. We know anticipating danger. We know anticipating schedules, and we can plan. We have the capacity to understand time. That's the part my dogs don't really get. They didn't understand that time changed. They just went because they were anticipating something that they already knew about. We have the ability to change time, to understand time, and to plan far into the future, right? If you have a savings account for Christmas, lots of people do, right? All through the year, you anticipate the arrival of this time, and so you put up things. That is the fifth plane of existence. You have length, width, height, thinking, and time. Five dimensions of existence. The next step, I believe, is going to be the sixth plane of existence, which is the disembodied spirits, the disincorporated, these spirit guides, but not the angels and the demons, who are higher order. They are simply humanity passed on to the next realm with a better than normal understanding of time. They can see forward and back in ways that we can't. We can anticipate, but we can't really see it. These guides and things such as, they can see the future. That is the sixth plane of existence, the forward motion and mastery of time. The seventh plane, I believe, is the angels and the demons, the higher order, and they have all of the things that we have, plus the ability to see in time and to understand the thoughts in aggregate. They can take my thoughts and your thoughts, not necessarily take it, but understand them, and make the correct predictions of time and the direction that it is going to go. They have a better than average mastery of both time and thought. And then the eighth plane of existence, with the 1 through 8 being important numbers, right? The eighth plane of existence is the divine, from whence we came and which we will return, the all-encompassing everything. That is the realm of the actual divinity, not the tiny spark of a divinity that is resting inside of your mind. That is the theory of spiritual evolution. Each step partakes in the prior step in a way which assimilates it, right? Plants eat the minerals, animals eat the plants, humans eat the animals and the plants. And so it is all about an incorporation path moving forward. This piece of carbon is taken by this plant. This animal eats the plant and absorbs the carbon. I eat the animal and absorb the carbon from the animal. That is a progressive, and through that, the individualized carbon atom gets to evolve along with us into the next plane of existence. You are made up of who knows how many pieces of carbon, who knows how many pieces of phosphorus. We can give you a ratio. It's pretty general, but we can give you a ratio of these things, but we can't tell you with precision how many pieces of it are there. That is the power process of spiritual evolution. That is how I believe that it works. I can be wrong, but that is what I base a lot of things off of. The pattern of 8 is a fundamental part of life. It's the fundamental harmonics of life, as a matter of fact. Okay, so there's another thing brought to light by the text. All right, if the Hindu philosophy teaches the presence of a degree of soul in the lowest forms of vegetable life, and even in every atom in space, how is it possible that it should deny the same immortal principle to man? And if it once admit the immortal spirit in man, how can it logically deny the existence of the parent source? I will not say the first, but the eternal cause. Neither rationalists nor sensualists, who do not comprehend Indian metaphysics, should estimate the ignorance of Hindu metaphysicians by their own. The grand cycle, as we have heretofore remarked, includes the progress of mankind from its germ in the primordial man of spiritual form to the deepest depth of the degradation he can reach. Each successive step in the decadent descent being accompanied by a greater strength and grossness of the physical form than its precursor, and ends with the flood. But while the grand cycle, or age, is running its course, 7 minor cycles are passed, each marking the evolution of a new race out of the preceding one on a new world. And each of these races, or grand types of humanity, breaks up into subdivisions of families, and they, again, into nations and tribes, as we see the Earth's inhabitants subdivided today into Mongols, Caucasians, Indians, etc. We will pause very briefly and talk about, yes, there is a pattern of 8 that is a repeating pattern throughout all of creation. There are 7 different layers to the Earth. There are 7 different layers to the atmosphere. There are 7 different types of crystals. The number 7 is an important one, but it is always including the 8th part of it, right? Out of the 7 layers of the earth. You start at the core, you work your way out, and the last layer is going to be the 8th layer, which is water. Now, water is not really of the earth, right? It is of the waters, but it is included because it is the ending point and the beginning of the new cycle. The 7 layers of the atmosphere begin with water and extend to outer space. Now, is outer space exactly part of the waters of the air? No, not necessarily. It is something that we do not understand. It is plasma in its deactivated state, but it is the 8th capstone of the 7 harmonics that go from water to the upper atmosphere. If you would like more information on what the hell I am talking about on this, the fundamental harmonics of life is how you will get there. If you go to my page and you go into the little search microscope, or not microscope, what is it, a magnifying glass. If you go into the search function and you just type the number 8, it will bring up a few different lessons about that, but you will definitely find it in the fundamental harmonics of life. Before proceeding to show by diagrams the close resemblance between the esoteric philosophies of all the ancient peoples, however geographically remote from each other, it will be useful to briefly explain the real ideas which underlie all those symbols and allegorical representations, and have hitherto so puzzled the uninitiated commentators. Better than anything, it may show that religion and science were closer knit than twins in days of old, that they were 1 and 2 and 2 and 1 from the very moment of their conception. With mutually convertible attributes, science was spiritual and religion was scientific, like the androgyne man of the first chapter of Genesis, male and female, which I still maintain they are intentionally misinterpreting here. Passive and active, created in the image of the Elohim. Omniscience developed omnipotency, and the latter called for the exercise of the former, and thus the giant had dominion given him over all the 4 kingdoms of the world. But, like the second Adam, these androgynes were doomed to fall and lose their powers as soon as the 2 halves of the duality separated. The fruit of the tree of knowledge gives death without the fruit of the tree of life. There was already going to be death. Man must know himself before he can hope to know the ultimate genesis, even of beings and powers less developed in their inner nature than himself. So, with religion and science united 2 and 1, they were infallible, for the spiritual intuition was there to supply the limitations of physical senses. Separated, exact science rejects the help of the inner voice, while religion becomes merely dogmatic theology. Each is but a corpse without a soul. The esoteric doctrine, then, teaches, like Buddhism and Brahmanism, and even the persecuted Kabbalah, that the one, infinite, and unknown essence exists from all eternity, and in regular and harmonious successions is either passive or active. In the poetical phraseology of Manu, these conditions are called the day and the night of Brahma. The latter is either awake or asleep. The Svabhavikas, or philosophers of the oldest school of Buddhism, which still exist in Nepal, speculate but upon the active condition of this essence, which they call Svabhavat, and deem it foolish to theorize upon the abstract and unknowable power in its passive condition. Hence they are called atheists by both Christian theology and modern scientists, for neither of the two are able to understand the profound logic of their philosophy. The former will allow of no other God than the personified secondary powers, which have blindly worked out the visible universe, and which became with them the anthropomorphic God of the Christians, the Jehovah, roaring amid thunder and lightning. In its turn, rationalistic science greets the Buddhist and the Svabhavikas as the positivists of the archaic ages. If we take a one-sided view of the philosophy of the latter, our materialists may be right in their own way. The Buddhists maintain that there is no creator but an infinitude of creative powers, which collectively form the one eternal substance, the essence of which is inscrutable. Hence, hence, not a subject for speculation for any true philosopher. Socrates invariably refused to argue upon the mystery of the universal being, yet no one would have ever thought of charging him with atheism, except those who were bent upon his destruction. Upon inaugurating an active period, says the Secret Doctrine, an expansion of this divine essence from within outwardly occurs in obedience to external and immutable law, and the phenomenal or visible universe is the ultimate result of a long chain of cosmical forces, thus progressively set in motion. In like manner, when the passive condition is resumed, a contraction of the divine essence takes place, and the previous work of creation is gradually and progressively undone. The visible universe becomes disintegrated, its material dispersed, and darkness, solitary and alone, broods once more over the face of the deep. To use a metaphor which will convey the idea still more clearly, the outbreathing of the unknown essence produces the world, and an inhalation causes it to disappear. This process has been going on from all eternity, and our present universe is but one of an infinite series which had no beginning and will have no end. Thus, we are enabled to build our theories solely on the visible manifestations of the deity, on its objective, natural phenomena. To apply to these creative principles the term God is puerile and absurd. One might as well call by the name of Benvenuto Cellini, the fire which fuses the metal, or the air that cools it when it is run in the mold. If the inner and ever concealed spiritual, and to our minds abstract, essence within these forces can ever be connected with the creation of the physical universe, it is but in the sense given to it by Plato. It may be termed, at best, the framer of the abstract universe which developed gradually in the divine thought within which it had lain dormant. In Chapter 8, we will attempt to show the esoteric meaning of Genesis and its complete agreement with the ideas of other nations. The 6 days of creation will be found to have a meaning little suspected by the multitude of commentators who have exercised their abilities to the full extent in attempting to reconcile them by turns with Christian theology and unchristian geology. Disfigured as the Old Testament is, yet in its symbolism is preserved enough of the original and in its principal features to show the family likeness of the cosmogonies of the older nations of the Jews. And we're not going to get into these diagrams yet. We're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. It may be a little bit shorter than I would really like, but that means that the next one's just going to be a little bit longer than I would really like. And so hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult concepts. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. The things which I talked about are things which have been revealed to me, some of it by thought and introspection, and some of it by a divine flash of inspiration. And so take it with a grain of salt. You don't have to believe the things that I do. I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about these concepts. I have spent an awful lot of time in prayer, fasting, and meditation behind these concepts so that I could have a better understanding of them. And I feel like I have one. I feel like I have a better understanding even than most of the source material. That may seem a little bit prideful. I can understand that. But it is not done in a manner of pride. I am doing this humbly to try and show that there is another possibility. Now, I firmly believe that the things that I talk about are the truth, or else I would not say it. But if I am proven wrong, I will say so. The number 138 is extremely important. We have talked about it extensively here and in other places, and so we're not going to dig too deep, but it is an important thing. There is the one, there is the Trinity, and the 8 parts are very important. That is how manifestation happens. Many of the things which are related to this are, in my estimation, misunderstood. Many of the numerical symbologies that people look at, in my estimation, are misunderstood. I'm here to bring a little bit of clarity as we go along, such as the theory of spiritual evolution. That's not out of line with what is being written here. I came up with that through meditation as a divine flash, right? And then I see it corroborated in these works. I see it supported by the text, even if they don't frame it in the same way. That's why I stopped and pointed it out, because it is a corroboration of the thing that I believe. Just as seeing the number 318 is a corroboration of the thing that I believe, 138 being important. There are many truths hidden within lies. You can find that all the way through the Bible, right? I say, despite the best efforts of men, the Word of God gets through. That is true whatever the source may happen to be. Now, am I correctly interpreting? Possibly. In my estimation, yes, but it's possible that I am not. Always try to hold that possibility that you're not in your mind, because it is an important thing to remain correctable. Right? You are not going to be always right. I am not going to be always right. Even the things that I consider divine inspiration can be wrong. They can be given to me by the wrong entities on the 6th or the 7th plane. That is a possibility that you must keep in your mind. Spend the time to investigate, to understand the things that I have said, the things that are being said here, and see if they correlate for you. See if they ring true for you. See if they seem to be the way that it works. And if so, you should definitely check out some more of these playlists, because there is a lot of information held there. Things that I don't get into as we go along as often as I probably could, because I can just point you back, right? That's why we laid all of that groundwork. This is still laying groundwork. We're still laying down the history of things. I'm working on the future of things. I am starting the book that I have been promising for so long, because finally I have what seems to be the correct framework with which to build that particular system around. Some of that is still being revealed as we go along. Some of it is still being corroborated as we go along, so that I feel better about dispensing it. You don't know this, but yesterday I started writing this book, right? I've got right here, you can't really see it, but this is the beginning of the outline. I started writing the beginning of the narrative yesterday, and part of this is in there. As a matter of fact, right where I ended, so that I could get further corroboration before I started, was corroborated in here. And so, for me, that is a sign that I'm on the right track. That could just be in my mind. I'm going to put out a book where it says an instruction manual on how to do manifestation and magic. I could be completely off base. It could be working just for me. I have enough evidence through other people that it is not just me, that I feel comfortable about it, putting it out. These studies have been enlightening to me. Some of them I talk about. Some of them I talk in extreme detail. We stop and we talk every paragraph. Some of them I read the entire chapter and we don't have anything to talk about, because I am simply learning, right? If I have a knowledge, I'm going to relay the knowledge, and if I don't, I'm going to learn from the source. Now, do I take these sources as the absolute fact? No. No more than I take my own divine revelation as that. I relay it as though it is fact. I believe it as though it is fact. But if I am proving incorrect, I will make the appropriate public apology and correction. That is how I work. It'll be interesting to see, and this is completely off topic, but it will be interesting to see whether that happens with all of these flat earth people after it has just been proved, as I have been telling you for how long now here in the spiritual community, that the earth is a globe. If you are unfamiliar, you should definitely check that stuff out. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if there is another work you would like to see me go through in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.